All right, it's green. Does this? It does work. All right, very good. All right, well, welcome. We're sparse on this topic that's often not a surprise. It's a difficult topic, but it's a thing that really we need to talk about, and we need to hear more about it. When I was, and I won't tell you how old I was, but I do remember when I was in college having a screaming match with a person who was, and he went on to become a pastor, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But he was showing these pictures, and I said, how can you show those pictures? I mean, that's so disgusting. And now, obviously, it was a topic that, to me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But I had never thought it through, and I can't tell you how it changed. I can tell you how it intensified, and that's because of my daughter, Rebecca, getting involved in it. But about when I was 30, I hadn't thought about the subject for, 3 or 4 years, and I'm just sure God used that time to flip my mind, because now when I think about it, the idea of an abortion, it's nauseating when you think as to what has happened. But every life has been touched by it. I mean, there's not anybody here who can say they don't know somebody who's had one or had one themselves or maybe contributed to somebody's situation it did. And so we all need forgiveness on that, but we also need to know how to speak about that. And that's what the Almons are here, but Meg is the one who's going to be talking to us tonight. And I found out about her from Rebecca. She said, because we get a speaker here, we try to do it frequently. She said, you should call the Almons. So I did, and here they are. And it's just you speaking tonight, I understand. So, which is fine, since I gathered, unless you had an argument on the way up from Grand Rapids. Yeah, exactly. I was wondering about that. Yeah, exactly. You're on your own. So I say that facetiously, but really, welcome to Gaylord. We really appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to what you have to say. I'll let you introduce yourself further, but thanks again for being here. Is Paul or Jeremy here? If one of you wouldn't mind opening in prayer before we start. Plenty of warning, right? You want this, and probably should, since it's being live streamed.
Mike said welcome, so we'll get right to it. Let's pray. Lord, we're grateful for today. We're grateful for tonight and for the opportunity to hear Meg and Tripp throughout the weekend. We give you thanks and ask that as we listen, Lord, that your Spirit would guide and direct our thoughts, that you would teach us something new. Lord, that you would cause us to just feel the movement of the Holy Spirit in us, Lord, as we seek to be more prepared, Lord, as we seek to answer more questions into the future of how we should look at this particular event in light of the movement of the culture away from life. So we thank you and praise you for what we will receive tonight. We give you the glory in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, Amen.
All right. Well, one of my heroes is the philosopher Dr. Peter Kraft, and he said, I think sometimes we forget that when we gather in a place like this, specifically in a church, that what we're actually doing is calling together a meeting of spies, and we're plotting a revolution to overthrow the prince of this world. And sometimes we forget that that's what's happening here, but it's potent stuff. And we're going to talk tonight about the Christian or the biblical worldview being true. We're going to talk about how it relates to this issue of abortion, but we're going to do pro-life apologetics tonight. Now, I did earn a master's degree in Christian apologetics. I only tell you that because some people are wondering, why is she going to be the one speaking to us tonight? So that is in my background. But I will also tell you that when I called my dad to tell him I was going to go and pursue a degree in Christian apologetics, he got very quiet on the phone. He wanted to know what Christianity had to be sorry about. And I had to say, that's not it, Dad, before you disown me here. No, it is offering reasons for the truth claims of Christianity. Tonight, I will be offering reasons for the truthfulness of the pro-life view as it is grounded in the larger biblical worldview. So We are going to dive right in and get started. I want you guys to meet my family. You'll see them throughout the evening in the presentation because why wouldn't I talk about my family? I love them. But they provide some ready examples of some pretty fun things that we'll see as we go. Now, down to business. We are going to talk about abortion. There is no tiptoeing into that. There is no sneaking around it. That would do you a disservice. We're going to come right through the front door and we're going to talk about it. And the reason I say that is because in our culture today, when you start to have a conversation about abortion, you'll find about 5 seconds in, people are talking about anything but abortion. That's one of the things that makes it very complex. There's a lot that bumps into it. It is complex emotionally. It is complex psychologically. It's complex politically. God knows we're seeing that right now. It is complex socioeconomically. All of these things are things that bump into abortion. But morally speaking, abortion is a very simple issue. And I hope that that is what comes across tonight as we learn ways to enter into conversations and how to talk about it. When Roe v. Wade was overturned a couple of years ago, that was never going to end abortion. I think that was a common thought, particularly in the larger pro-life community who weren't directly in the day-to-day of what's going on the political level or even at the cultural level. The thought was it's going to be gone, but that was never going to be the case. What did happen is you got your voices back. The Supreme Court in 1973, when they turned abortion into a federal matter and made it legal for all states everywhere, at that time it was not something that all states approved of. But the Supreme Court took that decision and the voice away. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, all it meant was the battle was going to begin in earnest at the state level. And since that time, Michigan has been through the ringer, as have many other states, when it comes to the pro-life arena and what's happening with our laws. Now, I want to lay some ground rules quickly. The first thing you have to know is that we are going to do pro-life apologetics, which means we're going to be hanging out at the idea level. That's the wonderful thing about apologetics. You're all apologists, by the way. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16, when it talks about being ready to offer reasons for the hope that is within you, that word in the Greek language is apologia, from which we get apologetics. So we're all apologists. So we all get to learn, how do we give those reasons? How do we offer that hope that is within us? And when we take things into the apologetics realm to talk about them, it's a little bit like sending a kite up into the air, because we want to look at things in the abstract. We want to see, do the ideas connect? Do they flow? Do they make sense? Are they consistent? But the thing about kites is they're always tethered to something, just like these ideas are tethered to very real people. And as Judge Mike just pointed out, this is something that causes an immense amount of pain. In fact, that is one of two things that I've learned in the years of discussing this issue. No matter who I talk to, no matter where they stand on the spectrum, from the most staunch abortion advocate to the most passionate pro-life advocate, one consistency is the pain that abortion causes. Another consistency is that no matter who I talk to, the issue is one that is driven by compassion. There's nobody talking about this issue who isn't doing it because they don't care for someone. And if we miss that in conversations, then we miss the other person entirely, and suddenly we are butting heads. So we have to remember those ground rules as we dive in. I promise that I will not forget that these ideas are tethered to real people. The second thing I do want to say is that tonight we are going to be looking at this through the lens of the gospel. Tripp and I will talk more tomorrow about this concept, but we believe that Christianity is true. Not just true because I believe it, not just true because it was taught to me, but true because it is the best explanation of the way the world works, of the way the world really is. It is true as a worldview. It is true as a relationship. It is true in all of those ways that are outside of me and my preferences. We'll talk more about that in just a moment, but that is the only way I know how to approach this issue, even if we don't go directly to our Bible tonight to talk about it. Because apologetics reaches into other realms. We're going to talk from science. We're going to talk from philosophy. And we're going to do that because if God is the person of truth as Jesus claimed to be, then he's God of those things as well. So, to talk about abortion, well, we have to dig underneath it. and talk about those ideas. And it turns out that when it comes to talking about abortion, we're talking about deep questions, questions that have been there all along, but questions that more than ever before today are at the forefront of what people are asking. The questions are, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be valuable as a human being? Everyone has to grapple with those questions and answer them. So when we talk about this issue, that's where we are going. And that's important for us to even start a weekend like this talking about this issue. Because Christians, how do we share the gospel with a world that has forgotten what they are and why they matter? This is a great place to dive in and start. And it turns out that to talk about those types of things, to talk about identity and humanity, stories are a good place to go. There are a lot of stories surrounding abortion right now, which is why we're here to reform that narrative and tell a better story about who people are and why they matter. I'm going to start with a story like this one. How many of you have read this book? You have kids, grandkids that you read this book to. If not, that's fine. I'm going to introduce it to you. But the best stories out there are the ones that remind us of true things that we didn't know we already knew. I hope that makes sense, because that happens to me all the time in the reading of great stories. This one is called You Are Special. It is about a people group called the Wemmicks. Now, the Wemmicks are little wooden puppets, and they live in a village. They have a very odd way of life. Every Wemmick has a box on his or her belt full of stickers. And every day they walk outside of their Wemmick households and they watch each other. Now, some of the Wemmicks are your resident athletes, right? They can do all of the tricks. They can jump high and spin and run and then do the acrobatic stuff, right? Some of the Wemmicks have brand new shiny paint. They're very beautiful to look at. Some of the Wemmicks can speak well or sing well, like little Wemmick, I don't know, Adele's or something, running around, and this is what they do. And the other Wemmicks see them do these amazing things, and when they watch them do them, they pull gold star stickers out of that box and they place it on these Wemmicks anytime they do something amazing. Like, oh, that was wonderful. Now, some of the other Wemmicks aren't as talented. Our main character is one of those. His name is Punchinello. You guys just say that for me real quick, because this is going to be interactive. Yeah, Punchinello, right? I mean, almost if you did the Italian thing, maybe it would come out less weird. I don't know. I didn't name him, but that's his name. And he tries to do all the fun things, but every time he tries, he messes up. He's clumsy, so when he tries to do the acrobatics, he falls down. And when he falls down, he inevitably scratches up his paint, so he's kind of dinged up. And when he tries to explain what happened, he gets nervous and he trips over his words, and it just never comes out right. And so Punchinello doesn't have a single gold star. In fact, when we find him at the beginning of the story, he's covered in gray dot stickers. No stars, all dots. And the other Wemmicks look at Punchinello and they say things about him like, look at him. He's just not a very good Wemmick. And Punchinello begins to believe this about himself, so he doesn't want to go outside and be around the other Wemmicks. Now we're going to leave Punchinello there for just a little while. There is more to the story, but I want to pull one great big idea out of this little children's book as we dive into what we're going to do this evening. The idea is that Punchinello lives in a society where some of his kind don't matter as much as others. Men and women, we live in a society where some human beings don't matter as much as others. Now, I told you we were going to traffic in ideas, but rule number one of apologetics is that ideas have consequences. My friend John Stonestreet will tell you, bad ideas have victims. This is a bad idea. And just to start off the bat to point out, that idea, if you take it on a test drive or just do a brief glance at history, has manifested in other times and places in ways that have had devastating consequences and many victims. You can go as far back as Israel under Pharaoh. That was slavery of the rotten kind. You can come up to ancient Rome, where slavery was, of course, practiced, but also abortion, where gladiators and others were killed in the arena for entertainment, and the crowds begged for more because these lives were disposable. You can fast forward to the Holocaust. Someone deemed an entire people group subhuman, and millions died, We can look at slavery in our nation's history. We can look at slavery as it exists right now in the form of human trafficking and sex trafficking, which is something that many of our loved ones and friends care deeply about. Same idea as an undercurrent. Now, I still have work to do to make the case, but if I'm right about the issue of abortion, then this idea manifests itself in our society today to, and this is a very conservative number, around 2,000 to 2,500 lives every single business day. I say conservative number because that's how the numbers come in from places like Guttmacher and the CDC, but there are states now that are no longer required to report their abortion findings. One of those is California. So we don't know the true number, and with the rise of telemedicine now, we may never know the true number. Still, ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the pro-life view, and then we're going to flip things inside out. I'm about to put on the screen what the pro-life argument is when you boil it down to its simplest form. It could be a conversation starter all by itself. We'll get there in just a second. After that, what we're going to do is look at 6 ways that right now the culture is arguing for abortion, and we're going to see why none of them work the way that they want them to. My goal is, and my hope is, that when you see the flaws in the way the culture is arguing, you cannot unsee them, and you'll be able to move forward in conversations in an effective way to tell a better story, a truer story. So the pro-life argument, if you boil it down, looks like a syllogism. Say that word for me. Syllogism. Yes, a syllogism. A syllogism is simply a way of arguing. It's a deductive form of arguing, so that means you give premise, and if the premises hold, they flow naturally into the conclusion. So we're just taking the pro-life argument and putting it in this form. Premise number 1, pretty easy. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Nobody really argues with me about that. I had a student ask me once, "Hey, Megan, if somebody argues with that one, what do you do?" I said, "Well, you should probably run away because they might be a dangerous individual," right? No, that's a different way of looking at it. Most of the time you talk to people, they're going to say, "Yeah, sure." Here's where they disagree, premise 2. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Now let me define abortion for you so we know what we mean by this word. Abortion is defined, I'm pulling this from the ethicist Christopher Kaiser, as the intentional killing of a human embryo or fetus. We use those scientific words there because this definition begs no questions. My pro-choice friends are fine with this definition. My pro-life friends are fine with the definition also, but they'd rather use the word baby, right? The definition of abortion, the intentional killing of a human embryo or fetus. If I'm right with the pro-life argument that we're going to unfold throughout the evening, then the conclusion would naturally follow. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that. Therefore, abortion is wrong. That's the pro-life argument. Notice in that argument, there's nothing there about political things. There's nothing there about whether or not it's a religious issue. There's nothing there about, oh, this is an emotionally hard thing. No. This is the argument. Abortion either intentionally kills innocent human beings or it doesn't. When I told you guys, morally speaking, it's simple, I meant it. Those other things may be additional wrongs. We can talk about that and how to navigate it, but we've got to keep our eye on the main thing and then keep the main thing the main thing. So now that we've looked at the pro-life syllogism, we're going to look at these 6 ways people are arguing for it. I'll tell you right now, the first 2 are going to take a little longer to unpack. The rest will go a little faster than that. And then when we end up, we'll have time for questions and we can interact as we go. Good? Let's dive in. The first way that people are arguing for abortion that just doesn't work is that they tend to confuse our moral claims about abortion with mere preference claims. When I begin to talk about the issue with some people, they'll tell me things like this. They'll say, "Megan, I see that you think that it's wrong, but you can't push your views on other people." I was on campus in Florida one time working with a pro-life group there. It was in Jacksonville, at the university there. And the pro-life club wanted to have an event at the center of campus where they invited dialogue among the students. So they had me come in to talk to their club members so that they could have these conversations. And I hung out for the event because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And there was a young woman there at the event. She had obviously walked by earlier and overheard what was happening, gone and scribbled a sign that said pro-choice and proud of it, and she was holding it up. And she was clearly agitated. You could tell she'd made the sign in a hurry because it was a little bit messy, but she was saying things to people as they walked by. And so I approached this young woman. I said, hi, my name's Megan. What's your name? Her name was Amanda. I said, great, good to meet you. Tell me, what brought you out to the event today? She said, here's the deal. I would never have an abortion, but what you guys are doing on campus, I don't think you have a right to tell anyone what goes on in the privacy of their bedroom or their sex life, and I really think you should leave. I said, well, thank you for your honesty, because she was very honest. But may I ask you a question? Because I'd heard something she said I wanted to ask her about. She said, sure. I said, what do you personally oppose about abortion? Because she'd said she would never have one. She didn't hesitate in her answer. She said, well, it kills a baby. I said, Amanda, I really want to understand your view. Here's what I've got so far. Please tell me if I have it wrong. You think that abortion kills a baby. Those were her words. But you think it should be okay for other people to kill babies. And she looked at me for a second, and she said, I've never thought about it that way before. Guys, it was an incredibly gracious response. She was talking about abortion as a preference issue, and I was trying to show her that it's not that kind of issue. It's a different kind of issue. We ended up having a great conversation. I don't know if I changed her mind entirely, but we gave each other things to think about, and as you'll learn, that's a win. Because who knows when Amanda will wake up one day and go, oh my goodness, that girl that I was talking to on campus, she was right about this. When we talk about confusing moral claims with preference claims, the culprit is moral relativism. It is a view of morality that is not the Christian view of morality. The Christian view of morality understands that morality is real and knowable. We can know what is right, we can know what is wrong. We would ground that in the nature and character of God. It has to come from somewhere beyond us for it to be this kind of thing. But moral relativism says there is no objective standards to which we are beholden. Most materialistic worldviews, in fact, all the materialistic worldviews would have to hold to something like this because there's nowhere to ground that morality that would be transcendent. There is no transcendent in a materialistic worldview or a materialistic way of seeing the world. Moral relativism says that morality comes from us, and we either decide it as a culture or we decide it as an individual. So morality is purely subjective in nature. Now let me define those words as we're moving forward, these two terms that I've thrown out there, subjective and objective. Turns out there's a couple different types of truth out there. Subjective truths are truths that are matters of preference. Subjective truths are about the subject. I always remember this way, you guys. My mind works, I'm a homeschool mom, and so when I think about these things, I got to break it way down. That's what I'm going to do because that's how I understand it. Just like the subject of a sentence is what the sentence is about, a subjective truth claim is about you, the subject. Subjective truths are created by you, the subject. Because you create them, they are matters of preference. And because my subjective truth claims have no more authority than yours, in other words, my favorite flavor of ice cream has no more authority than your favorite flavor of ice cream, all subjective truths are equally valid, all the same. But morality is not subjective, and I know this because when I make a moral claim, I'm not talking about my preferences. The claim isn't about me. The claim is actually about the nature of reality. That's out here. Objective truths look like this. The objective truths are about the objects in question, my statement about morality and whether or not it lines up with the way the world really works. Objective truths exist independently of the subject. That means they're true out here whether I prefer them or not. Objective truths are true whether I am even aware of them or not. They're things that you discover in the world. You don't create them. And so you can make objective claims, and they can be right or wrong. They can be true or false. They are not equally valid like the subjective claims. This is key. And typically you can bring some evidence to the table to talk about them. What's important for us tonight, because we're going to unpack this some more tomorrow, particularly as to how we got to this point of thinking this way about morality. But what's important for us to understand is that when we make a moral claim about abortion, we are not making a subjective or a preference claim. We're making an objective kind of claim, which actually puts you on some humble footing, because it means that by the very nature of the claim, you're submitting to the person that you're talking to that you might be, could be, wrong about your view. Because objective claims can be right or wrong, true or false. Now, after tonight, you're going to have lots of reasons to tell them as to why you're not wrong, that you have good reason to stand where you stand as this being an objectively true thing. But that's different from a culture that would frame abortion subjectively. That would be saying, well, I think it's true, and I cannot be wrong, because subjective truths are all equally valid. So in a culture trying very hard not to be arrogant, we actually find that understanding where this goes as far as subjective-objective, this issue is an objective issue, puts you on very humble ground. Sometimes it takes some work to help the other person see that. But for moving forward here, we're not making a subjective or a preference view. We're making an objective type of point when it comes to morality. Here's how I know that. Better explained through use of an example. This meme or this saying came back into circulation after the overturn of Roe. If you don't like abortion, then don't have one. Problem solved. You don't like abortion? Don't have one. There. Wasn't that easy? Notice that word like. It takes a moral issue, abortion, and tries to plunk it into the subjective or preference realm. It's not that kind of issue. It's twisting the issue. What if that meme said, oh, you don't like slavery? Well, then don't own one. Problem solved. Oh, you don't like spousal abuse? Well, then don't beat your spouse. There. Wasn't that easy? There's a little bit of a different take on it. See, these are moral issues also, but we are a little clearer on these moral issues, and we certainly would not say that they are matters of preference. Abortion is one that is framed this way often. We're going to watch a video clip just as we round out this first one so that you guys can do the work of trying to go, okay, here's where I see that happening. This is a clip of the Dr. Phil show. Lila Rose was interviewed on the Dr. Phil show. She is the president of Live Action. That is her organization. It is a pro-life organization. She was presenting a pro-life view similar to the one you'll hear tonight, but there was a pro-choice panel on the show so that both sides would be represented. And what you'll hear here is from one of the pro-choice panelists. Now, keep in mind as we play this video and all of the video clips that we'll watch tonight, our objective is not to tear people down. My beef is not with this woman. But I will tear down her ideas all day long if it falls into line with what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Our weapons are not of flesh and blood. They are divinely powerful for the destruction of strongholds. And he's talking about sets of ideas, ways of seeing the world. We are to tear down arguments, he said, lofty opinions raised up against the knowledge of God. We're taking thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. So that is our objective here. Got it? We're going to roll that video. Good.
The real argument here we're having is about choice and a person's right to choose what is best for them, what is best for them regarding family planning, what is best for them regarding their bodies and their ownership. And when we are listening to this debate, we're constantly getting back to about who's deciding what. If you determine for yourself that's when life begins, that is fine for you. But someone else may determine something completely different. And this is where, from a pro-choice standpoint, we're saying it is not for us to decide for anyone what they believe, how they believe, but they have options. The real argument here we're having
Where in that video did you hear some clear examples of what we were just talking about? And she said something like, the real argument here is we're talking about choice, right? Up to me to decide for myself, up to you to decide for yourself. Good. Where else?
Same thing, but where life begins.
Yeah, that was an interesting one too, because we're going to go there next. We're going to go to the science, which is what Lila had been talking about. But she's even taken the science and made it relativistic. I determine, you determine, okay, which is no longer science. Yeah, good. All right, so when you hear that language, you won't be able to unhear it now. Anytime someone says, true for me, but not for you, you might believe, but you can't push your morality on other people, or you shouldn't push your morality on other people. First of all, that word should, that's a moral statement. So what are they doing to you? The very thing they've accused you of doing to them. I would point it out graciously. Okay, if we're snarky, we lose every time. Besides, 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 said we do it with gentleness and respect, just like Jesus. Doesn't mean he wasn't firm, but he certainly wasn't snarky. He was tearing down ideas, not the individuals who held them. Okay, if you hear things like, oh, you Christians, you just want to legislate morality. Oh boy, another relativistic one, because newsflash, all laws legislate morality, do they not? So you can just, if you wanted to do that in conversation, we can talk more about that in Q&A, but you just, in the form of a question. But isn't it true that all laws do that? And see what they say. Things like that. You're inviting that conversation, not pushing on them in a snarky way. Okay, keep going. If someone has relativized abortion, they've taken out of the objective realm where it belongs and dropped it into the realm of preference, have they addressed your syllogism? They have not. So keep that word in mind tonight. Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. You are talking about an argument that is objective in nature. They've done something else with it. They have not defeated your argument. In fact, the only way to defeat a syllogism, you guys, or an argument like the one we're going to propose, is to go after the premises and say, hey, that's not true, or to show how the premises don't logically flow into the conclusion. That's it. They can tell you that they hate your argument. They're allowed to hate it, but it does nothing to defeat it. Because how we feel about a thing doesn't change what it is. Moving on, number 2. This is a biggie. They assume instead of argue with you. The first one, they confuse moral claims with preference claims. Number 2, they assume instead of argue. Here, they're assuming something particular about the unborn. And by way of a story, I'll let you know what that thing is. This is my daughter, Neely. She is 18 years old now. That curly hair did come from my body, for sure. Mine doesn't quite do that, but hers does, and it's beautiful. That has nothing to do with the story. We are from Georgia originally. We used to live in a beautiful cabin, log cabin in the woods in Georgia. I used to sign my letters to people from the cabin in the woods. Then they made a horror movie called Cabin in the Woods, and it was very disappointing. Now they've made a horror movie about a robot named Megan. I no longer know how to sign my letters, you guys. It's like they're out to get me, but whatever. We lived in the cabin in the woods. I have a daughter and I have a son named Rogan. My best friend Courtney has 3 boys. Her oldest, Micah, is one of Neely's best friends. They've known each other since they were very small. And Courtney came over one day to visit with me and brought the boys. So all of our children went out into the backyard to play together. Now, this is important. We could not see them. But we're not bad mothers. We left the door open so we could hear what was going on in the backyard. There was no road out there. It's just woods. They're fine, right? But we get like one sip into drinking our coffee, which is like mom survival mode. Some of you know this. And I hear the sound that every parent dreads. I hear blood-curdling screaming coming from the general direction of the backyard. You guys, it was distinctly female. There's only one girl, mine. So I did what any good mom would do. I dropped the coffee. I went running for the back door so I could see what was going on. And as I'm running, and by the way, just spoiler alert, the dropping of the coffee is the most tragic part of the story. So everybody can just take a breath because this is very worrisome, right? Okay. I didn't know that though, so I'm running for the back door, and she's still screaming, get it off me, just kill it. So as I'm mid-lunge, I'm asking myself a very particular question. Kill what? What's on you, right? It matters. If my daughter has this on her, so help me, I will help her kill it, all right? Some of you might be like entomologists or whatever, like you collect spiders and they bring them home as pets. I am not that person. We could talk about that later. We could argue about it later, but that thing's going to be like extra dead. It's on my daughter. It bites, okay? If it's our dog, we're not going to kill Gus. Gus is a blue heeler. You guys know what blue heelers are, right? Yes, Australian cattle dogs is the formal name of the breed. They round up cattle. They're cousins to the shepherds. The way they round up cattle is they bite their heels. So if you run across my backyard, my dog will mistake you for a cow and try to herd you, right? We're not going to kill Gus. We're going to put Gus back in the house. Like, kids, don't let Gus out of the house, right? Is it her brother? Now, I don't know what a normal Tuesday night looks like at your house. This is my house. You guys, I was making dinner. I hear another set of words that every parent dreads. Hey, Mom, look at this. Never good. I turned around, I had two reactions. One was, and the other one was, where's the camera? So we captured the moment. Turns out the answer to what is it actually matters. It was a lizard, by the way. It escaped unharmed. Micah had caught it. Neely wanted to hold it. It slipped out of her hand and went up her shirt sleeve. Right? And she just kind of, and it flung and it slithered away. Everybody was safe. Nothing was harmed in the making of that example. But it turns out the answer to what does it matter? Can we kill the unborn? That's the question when it comes to abortion. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, well, sure, if the unborn are not human beings. If it is true, as many claim, abortion is just an issue of health care, it's a simple medical procedure. It's no different than clipping a fingernail or pulling a tooth. What's the big deal? If they're right, then I can retire from this work. It's an odd thing to work at a job that you hope will put you out of work one day. But if the unborn are human, that's different. Before we can talk about whether or not we can kill them, we must answer this question first. What is the unborn? What is it? What is it we're talking about? Now, most people skip this question, and that's where our problem lies. They assume, by skipping the question, that the unborn are not human. And they'll give justifications for abortion, any number of them, and we'll name a few, that will follow from that, without ever even addressing the question, simply assuming the answer. They'll talk about abortion being an issue of privacy. That was the legal justification under Roe v. Wade. It was an appeal to privacy. It's a private matter between a woman and her doctor, between a woman and her God. Who are you to tell her what she can and cannot do? They will appeal to poverty, which is not a simple issue. This woman can't afford to feed any more children. Why would you force her to go through with yet another pregnancy? They'll talk about how abortion enables women who didn't mean to get pregnant to pursue their education, to pursue their careers, to pursue their dreams without this unplanned pregnancy standing in the way of that. They'll talk about abortion being the thing that prevents children from being born who are unwanted, and they will not be loved in the way they should be loved. Or children who are disabled, who might be born and then suffer. Abortion would make it so that that never has to happen. If we make abortion illegal in states like Louisiana and Florida and Kentucky, you're going to force women into back alleys. They might be killed or harmed because of abortion. If we make it illegal, wouldn't that be forcing your religion on other people? After all, it's a religious view, right? Oh, we could keep going. I want you to note a couple things. Number one, nothing that I just said, not a single of those justifications had to do with something silly, stupid, or trivial. It's all important, and it's all hard. You guys didn't come here for easy tonight. And number two, every single one of those justifications made the same mistake. I know that because if Rogan as a toddler were here, this is my favorite picture of my son. That is how he discovered the ocean. My daughter was like the elephant in the Tarzan movie. Like she tiptoed up. She's like, looks questionable to me. Like put her toe in and ran away from the waves. Not my son. This is after he ran from me, after I dropped him on the sand because he was wiggling so badly, I dropped him. He ran into that ocean and a wave pummeled him, took him right out. And this is how he came out of the water, you guys. You can pray for me. Same one that was Spider-Man in the last picture, yeah. I want you guys to imagine Rogan as a toddler. Imagine any toddler. And I want you to ask yourself, what if we were talking about a toddler? And I name every one of those justifications that I just named and said, these are reasons why I should be allowed to kill him. You'd think I'd lost my mind. No, you'd say, that's crazy. We don't kill 2-year-olds in the name of privacy. And we don't kill them when they get expensive. We don't kill teenagers when they get expensive either. They're usually really relieved to hear that because we work with a lot of young adults where we work at Summit Ministries. We don't kill 2-year-olds when they stand in the way of something we want, our education, our dreams, our careers, none of that. We don't kill 2-year-olds when they're unwanted. There are orphanages around the world full of seemingly unwanted children. I think the unwanted part is probably questionable. We don't kill 2-year-olds who are disabled. We help them. We have no problem with laws that make it harder to kill 2-year-olds in case the person who's trying to do that might be harmed in the act of trying. And it is no more religious to say that Rogan has value and cannot be killed than to say that he doesn't. We're back to our question. What is the unborn? Because I want to know if the unborn is human like the toddler is human. If so, we cannot kill them for those reasons either. Every time you hear a justification for abortion, and most of them will fall into this category, by the way, not all, but most, you need to ask yourself, what if we were talking about a 2-year-old? Take the unborn child out of the scenario, replace it with a toddler in your own mind, and you will know if the answer is no, we would not kill a 2-year-old for that reason. The person you're talking to is assuming the unborn is not human. We need to answer the question, what is the unborn? We can't stop there because we've posed the question, so it's only fair to answer it. I want to point out it's not a religious question. It is a scientific one. And so we do go to science to answer this question. Now, biology makes the most sense. That is the study of life. But there is a branch of science more particular than that. It's called embryology, meaning the study of embryos. There are entire textbooks on this topic. And if you read them, they all say pretty much the same thing as this one. A zygote, which is a single-celled embryo, is the beginning of a new human being. Human development begins at fertilization. It describes the process. The male gamete unites with the female gamete to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized, totipotent cell, that just means that as it begins cell division and development, those cells will be assigned to all different things. They're not differentiated yet or assigned to what they're going to become. This specialized totipotent cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. Now, science is pretty clear on what the unborn is. We'll unpack that more in just a second, but I want to point out that the pro-life community is not the only one that understands what the science says. Dr. Warren Hearn is an abortionist. He's in Boulder, Colorado, which is not too far from where Tripp and I live in the Springs area. Dr. Warren Hearn is one of the few abortionists in the country who does perform late-term abortions. And in this Planned Parenthood conference, as he was teaching a group of abortion doctors about this particular procedure, the dilation and evacuation abortion, he said this: we've reached a point in this particular technology where there is no possibility of denying an act of destruction. It is before one's eyes. The sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current. Camille Paglia, the feminist writer, whose work I will read, she's very honest. I disagree with her on many things. This is one of them. I've always frankly admitted that abortion is murder. That is the word she uses. It's not always the word I would use because murder implies a particular kind of intent, and I don't know that we can always prove that intent, but she says it. The extermination of the powerless by the powerful. Liberals, and she would call herself a liberal, for the most part, have shrunk from facing the ethical consequences of their embrace of abortion, which results in the annihilation of concrete individuals, not just clumps of insensate tissue. Elsewhere, Camille Paglia has written that she will refuse to call herself pro-choice. She calls that a cowardly euphemism. She is pro-abortion. She has also written that the pro-life view takes the moral high road, no question, and that hers is a view of convenience or expedience. Like I said, she's honest. But when we look at what that embryology said, we can break it down to where we can understand it and present it to someone pretty easily. The science tells us that from the moment of conception, the moment that fertilization is complete, I'll talk about that in just a second, the unborn is a living, distinct, whole human being. That's what we all were the moment that we came into existence. We know that they're alive. You were alive as an embryo because you checked every box on the question on the 7th grade science test that said, what is an organism? Embryos undergo cellular reproduction, meaning they grow. They metabolize by turning their food into energy. They respond when you mess with them. Embryos have even been shown in lab studies to be able to repair wounds. So just like our body, you get a scratch and it repairs itself. An embryo can do that. It's alive. It's an organism. It is a distinct living thing. That is, it's not part of the woman's body like my arm is a part of my body. We were all attached to our mothers at one point in time, but not part of her body. As an embryo, you had your own unique genetic code that differed from your mother's and from your father's, which is why we can talk about things like having their own blood type, having their own organs. All of that is true because of that genetic separation, distinct. Dr. Maureen Kondik is a neurobiologist at the University of Utah. And Dr. Kondik is asked as a scientist, how do you know when one type of cell becomes something new? I got to nerd out about this for just a second because it is amazing, right? Science can bring us to worship our Creator. It's like thinking his thoughts after him, Isaac Newton said. But Dr. Kondik's asked that question. How do you know when one type of cell becomes something new? She says, simple. There are two things that tell us that, but only one has to happen. Either the cell changes in the stuff it's made up of, that's its material composition, or it changes the way it behaves. And if either of those things happen, then biologically speaking, you have a brand new cell. Well, then she's asked Dr. Kondik, as a scientist, can you tell us when human life begins? She says, oh yes, that's observable. When sperm and egg meet, within about 250 milliseconds, that is a quarter of a second, the plasma membranes of those two cells begin to merge together to form a hybrid cell surface, meaning that egg cell changes in its material composition and becomes something brand new. About that quick. Within about 1 to 3 minutes, it forms the zona pellucida, which means it changes the way it behaves. It goes from being an egg cell that was supposed to attract sperm to repelling them like the Death Star, right? Changes the way it behaves entirely, but it already met the qualification by changing in the stuff that it was made up of in a quarter of a second. So scientifically, the term fertilized egg is incorrect. It goes from being an egg cell that could have survived about 24 hours in its environment to undergoing a transformation that quickly and becoming something new that can now survive upwards of 100 years. My grandfather just celebrated his 100th birthday, given medical technology, because it's a new human being. The egg cell surrenders its constituents to that zygote, a brand new human being. Finally, the unborn is a whole human being. We have it living, distinct, and it's whole. That one's a little weird, so let's break it down for just a second before we move on. That means that the unborn, as that embryo, that single-celled embryo, is not just a part of another human being. You guys do me a favor, pick up one hand for me. Awesome, turn it around. This is weird, I know. You're so trusting. Bring it down closer. Take your other hand and gently, adverbs matter, gently scratch the back of that hand. Good. Okay, I'm not liable if you scratch too hard because I used the adverb. Brush your hand off. Good. That was weird. We just scratched hundreds of our skin cells off the backs of our hands. Now, those cells all contain your DNA encoding. Most of them were dead because they were on your epidermis, but some of them are still alive on your lap. And they're going to die in just a minute. All because of you. No one in the room is guilty of mass murder. See, those cells are a part of you, and their role is to talk to all of your other cells so that you, the organism, function as a whole. An embryo is different in kind from any other cell in the body, even sperm and egg, which are very much alive, but with a specific role with regard to the organism they are a part of. The embryo, even at the single-celled stage, its parts work together towards its overall function, and it goes on to do something that is absolutely remarkable. Thus, the second distinction. You are not just a sum of your physical parts. Now, those in the world who would hold to a very secular worldview where science is all there is, they want you to believe that you're just your body. That's it. Just a body. Nothing more. Nothing more to you. You're just a clump of cells yourself. But you're not that. You're not like this podium. This is a sum of its parts. If I were to take it apart, it would cease to be a podium. It would be a pile of metal pieces. That's it. But guys, if you were to lose a limb, God forbid, your friends wouldn't be coming to the hospital to visit 3/4 of you. They would be coming to see you. Because there's more to you than just your body that grounds your identity through time and through change. You are not a properties kind of thing, which is just a sum of your physical properties. You're actually what philosophers would call a substance kind of thing. You came into being all at once. Everything that makes you you, biologically speaking, was already there. You didn't become more human as time passed. Humanity doesn't come in degrees. Commit that to memory. Humanity doesn't come in degrees. You didn't become more human. You simply matured as humans mature, and we're still doing that. Finally, you were not a constructed thing like the podium. You didn't come together piece by piece over a period of time. The cultural narrative is, oh, it's just a clump of cells. It's just a mass of tissue. Think about the terms we use. My grandmother would have talked about procreation when she talked about baby making. It's a great word. We should bring it back. We exclusively use the term reproduction. It's a factory term. Ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. Our words matter. But you didn't come into being over a period of time, piece by piece, like a Lego set. Again, you're that substance kind of thing. And from the very beginning, you have driven your own development from within. Richard Stith is a philosopher who helps us understand this with an illustration he offers. This is something everyone in this room knows. Yes? Praise God. You guys, I work with a lot of young people. I have to talk like this is an artifact. This is a camera, guys. It's not attached to an iPhone. Like, no, you got it. All right. Richard Stith says, imagine you have one of these and you're in the Amazon taking photos of the scenery around you, and you go to take a picture of what's right in front of you, and right as you snap the photo, this guy leaps out across the path. Now, I am an expert on these because I watched that show Wild Kratts with my kids. Not really. I do watch the show. I'm not an expert. But I do know that these guys are pretty rare. There's not a lot of them in the wild or photographed in the wild because there's not a lot in the wild. So if you caught this photo, you have something of value in your hands. I want you to imagine you're holding it and someone comes, they see what you're holding, they make a dismissive sound. They take it from your hand and they rip it in two and toss it down. You'd be furious. Thank you for the eyebrows because I'm with you. Imagine they looked at you and said, what's the big deal? It was nothing but a brown smudge. You'd say, no, it wasn't. I was holding a photograph of a jaguar. It was rare and beautiful and valuable. It was already there. You just couldn't see it yet because it was developing, just like we did and are still doing. You're not constructed. You've driven your own development from within. Guys, the science could keep going. We're going to go a little bit further here before we go to our third point because I have something very important to show you. But I want you to know this is what the science tells us. And it's amazing, just that little bitty bit. Sometimes you're in a conversation with someone and you might give them some scientific evidence, and they'll look at you and they'll go, so? We live in a world where words are quickly losing their meaning, but it is a very visual culture. And you'll find sometimes in talking about this issue that your words are not quite enough to convince someone. So what do you do then? Well, I think that we have to go to another step. And that's something my friends at Protect Life Michigan do a great job at. We have some representatives here in front. Sometimes we have to show them what we're talking about. It's one thing for students to learn about D-Day in a classroom. It's another thing to watch the opening scenes of Saving Private Ryan. It's one thing to read about the Holocaust in a book. It's another to visit one of the museums and see things like this well of shoes and the images and videos that they play at the museum, typically with waist-high walls so that children in strollers who are too young to carry such a burden cannot see them. I'm going to show you in just a second a 1-minute video clip that has very much to do with this issue. It does not show an abortion procedure, but it does show the victims of abortion. From early in the pregnancy through later in the pregnancy, the last one I believe is a 24-week. At that point, viable fetus or baby. It is hard to watch. There is no narration on the clip, and the reason for that is I want you to know that if this is something you don't want to see tonight, I invite you for that 1 minute just to look down. The music will end, and that will tell you the clip is done, and we will move on. But it's important that we see it if we choose to look at it, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. If you choose to watch, then I urge you to do it through the lens of the gospel, because that is the great leveler on this issue. This is not an us and them issue, any more than that woman on the screen. She was not my enemy. The ideas she was espousing were dead wrong, and I mean that literally. But she herself is an image bearer of God. And what we find when we lean into the gospel is that apart from the work of Christ, we all stand on a level playing field before God the Father, every last one of us. So we're able to walk into an issue like this one with our eyes wide open. We lean into the grace that is extended to us through the work of Jesus on the cross. That's how we interact. That's the lens that we look at it through, and we know, men and women, objectively speaking, there is resurrection on the other side. I'm going to play this clip, and then we'll move on from there. Hundreds of times I've watched that, and it doesn't get easier ever. The first time I saw that video clip, I was the person in the room who raised my hand and asked the man who showed it why I needed to see that. After all, I already agreed with him, and I wanted to know why did you show that to us? And he didn't give me an argument. He gave me a story. Same story I'll tell you, told to me by the one Scott Klusendorf, pro-life apologist who's trained me for 16 years. It's about Emmett Till. In this photograph, Emmett was 14 years old. He lived in Chicago, Illinois with his mother. He traveled by train one summer to visit his cousins in Money, Mississippi. Very different in 1955 than Chicago. Now, before he left, his mother gave him a gift. It was a ring that bore his dad's initials. And he put the ring on, and he got on the train, and he went to Mississippi. And when he got there, he was catching up with his cousins, and he was talking about life back in Chicago, and he was talking about the girls he'd been on dates with. And he had photos in his wallet of 2 young women, and both of them were white. And his cousins didn't believe him. So on a dare, Emmett walked into Bryant Grocery Store in Money, Mississippi, where he bought a piece of bubble gum. And the record's not exactly clear as to what happened next. He might have whistled at the clerk. He might have said something flirtatious to her, mildly so. She might have made up this part. Whatever happened, 2 nights later, that woman's husband and his brother went to Emmett's uncle's house and dragged Emmett from his bed, kidnapping him. They put him in the back of their car. They drove him to the outskirts of the city, where they proceeded to beat him, torture him, and murder him. Emmett Till was shot at close range with a shotgun. His body was tied to a cotton gin fan, big piece of metal equipment, with barbed wire, and he was thrown into the river. Now, 2 days later, some boys were fishing downstream from where Emmett went into the water, and there'd been some heavy rain in the area, so they saw something in the water, and they went to investigate what it was, and they found Emmett Till. But at that point, he was unrecognizable, but he still wore that ring. And when he'd been identified, law enforcement officials put his body in a wooden box, and they nailed the lid shut. They sent him by train to his mother. And when Mamie Till got that makeshift coffin, she announced publicly that they would be holding an open casket funeral for her son. Now, people thought she'd lost her mind. In her grief, they thought she'd gone crazy, but she stood her ground, and she said, "I want the whole world to know what they did to my boy." And Emmett Till did have an open casket funeral. You can find images online because photos were taken of his body. Thousands walked in front of that casket. Those photos were published. Jet Magazine was one of many that ran them. And when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, someone asked her later, "How did you have the courage to go through with that?" She was a little bitty thing. She said, "I couldn't get that boy's image out of my mind." She had seen the photos of Emmett Till. She already agreed that what was happening wasn't all right. But that day, she literally said, "I will not stand for this one more moment." It was a catalyst for the civil rights movement. Men and women, I'm asking you to join me on graciously, and that is an important adverb, lifting the casket on this human rights issue. Because if we don't, I promise, here in Michigan and all over the U.S., abortion will continue to be practiced. It is a Holocaust by every bit of that definition that the world has never seen like this before, and people will never have to look at it. We're far too good at hiding death away. If it is true that people assume that the unborn are not human, and science tells us otherwise with piercing clarity, then when we see things like this, we don't have to be rattled because we know they're assuming, not arguing with our syllogism. A clump of cells is not a baby. Well, they've miscategorized what the unborn is, assuming that it's a mere clump of cells, not a human being. When we see things like this, we don't have to get mad. After all, it's not subjective. It's not about us. We can simply ask the question, which humans are we talking about? Because the assumption here is that the unborn are not human beings. When Morpheus tells us from the Matrix, what if I told you making abortion illegal doesn't stop abortions, it only stops safe abortions? Our question is, safe for whom? Every successful abortion ends a human life. This one simply assumes that the unborn are not human and that abortion is harmless. Now, I'll pause here for 1 second and tell you that the one common ground you have with the person you're talking to, if they make a claim like this, is, I am not okay if anyone is harmed because of abortion. Anyone. My anyone just extends far past the mother. So you're not talking about hating women. You're not talking about not caring that women are harmed. We care deeply. We just care for the unborn ones also. I'm going to show you one more clip on this one before we move on. I want you to listen for, number 1, confusing moral claims with preference claims. Number 2, assuming that the unborn are not human. Listen for instances. You're going to hear a speech made by Michelle Williams, the actress, when she was awarded, I believe it's a Golden Globe, in 2020. It was just before the last election cycle. All that was kind of in the thick of things, so you'll hear some of that coming out. But she chose a public platform to use for her message. And so that's why we're going to use it as an example here. Let's watch this, dissect it, and then move on.
When you put this in someone's hands, you're acknowledging the choices that they make as an actor, moment by moment, scene by scene, day by day, but you're also acknowledging the choices they make as a person, the education they pursued, the training they sought, the hours they put in. I'm grateful for the acknowledgement of the choices I've made, and I'm also grateful to have lived at a moment in our society where choice exists, because as women and as girls, things can happen to our bodies that are not our choice. I've tried my very best to live a life of my own making, and not just a series of events that happened to me, but one that I could stand back and look at and recognize my handwriting all over, sometimes messy and scrawling, sometimes careful and precise, but one that I had carved with my own hand, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without employing a woman's right to choose. To choose when to have my children and with whom, when I felt supported and able to balance our lives, knowing, as all mothers know, that the scales must and will tip towards our children. Now, I know my choices might look different than yours, but thank God, or whomever you pray to, that we live in a country founded on the principle that I am free to live by my faith, and you are free to live by yours. So, women, 18 to 118, when it is time to vote, please do so in your own self-interest. It's what men have been doing for years. When you put this in some...
What did we hear?
She said, I can decide when I want to have my children.
Yes.
As if the aborted baby was not a child.
That's right. Assuming that that was not one of her children. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Assuming he was not a father, or the unborn wasn't, again, a person, and a human being. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I don't know how to describe it, but the whole difference between the sexes, that men have been able to decide for themselves whatever, and now we're able to do that.
Right, so the... Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like it's a...
Mm-hmm. No, I think that is a relevant part of the conversation, because it's often framed as a women's issue. For those live streaming, possibly we've heard her talk about the fact that these children were not children, right? That she chooses when she's going to have her children. Similar thing here, and then we've had the differentiation between women's right to choose, and men have been operating in their own self-interest for years, right? I think it's relevant because it is framed as a women's issue. We'll get into that in just a moment. Very good. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the relativism, distinguishing between my God, your God, my faith, your faith, as if faith or religion is not an objective kind of thing. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Good, yeah.
Something that she wasn't actually saying, but they were showing, was the women.
Yes.
Only showing the men. And then they showed Lizzie Phillips at the end, which is, if you go on Straussen's Creek, they were huge together, crying, and you can just tell it aches to your soul of what does she know, you know? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you start to think of things differently on what they're not saying.
Very good. And you were thinking, well, watching it on what was not being done or not being shown. They only showed women in the audience, and a friend of Michelle Williams. Again, we're not about tearing her down, right? I don't know what her life must be like. I know that she lost a husband who was an actor who took his own life. I know that she has 2 children by him, I think, that she's raising now as a single mom or with whomever she is now with. So there are things I don't know about her story that I'm curious about, but I can take what she said and analyze the ideas and interact with those, which is what we've done here. Now, in assuming the unborn are not human, has she addressed our syllogism, which states objectively that they are, our scientific argument? She has not refuted it. The argument still stands. Number 3, these will move very quickly. They assert instead of argue. This happens often. If someone shouts something at you, they have not argued with you. They have simply made an assertion. That's important to remember. I call this the bumper sticker analogy. If somebody shouts at you, "My body, my choice." If you can't trust me with a choice, how can you trust me with a child? Bands off of our bodies. Have they addressed your syllogism? No, they haven't. They've simply made an assertion. So don't let that be the end of a conversation. Let it be the beginning. Ask a question to engage. Excuse me, what do you mean by choice? What kind of choice are you talking about? I'm assuming we disagree over this choice, but do you think that maybe there are choices that some people ought not to be able to make? And then you're off and running in a conversation. Ask for some background. Ask for why they think that. Whatever it is, don't let that be the end of a conversation, because it certainly wasn't an argument. It was just an assertion. Don't forget that. There's a lot of asserting happening these days. A lot of asserting with loud voices and podium pounding as if that is the end of things. It is not, because we can think more carefully than that and ask a good question. Number 4, they attack you instead of argue. This is the ad hominem fallacy. For those who are familiar with that formal fallacy name, philosophical fallacy, it just means name calling. They've called you a name. I'm sorry, but if somebody calls you a name, have they addressed your syllogism? They have not. Not in the least. This happened to me in Connecticut. I was talking to, I wasn't talking to anyone at the time. I'd been speaking at some Catholic schools up there on the pro-life issue, and I was going from city to city on a 4-day tour, and I got to my hotel for the next stop late at night. It was freezing. You guys, we were in Michigan, so y'all know it was cold. I was from Georgia, so I'm not okay. I had on a sweatshirt that the school that morning had been gracious enough to gift to me. Said Mercy Tigers. They were the Mercy High School, and they were the Tigers. I was wearing it, and I went to the bar because the restaurant was closed. This is why I'm telling you all of this buildup, so you know why I was at the bar. Sitting at the bar, and I ordered a chicken Caesar salad. The plan for the evening was chicken Caesar salad, Gilmore Girls, bed. That was my plan. And I'm sitting there waiting for my food, and there are 2 men down the bar who have been, in the South, we would say they were overserved. Yeah, they were down there, and they were talking about, this was 3 election cycles ago. This was a minute ago. So the first time that Trump was up for office, I say that because he was a big part of the conversation they were having, and they started talking about abortion, y'all. And I thought to myself, I had that moment, I did not hear an audible voice from the Lord, I did not, but I had that thought that pops in the forefront of your head, like compulsion that I know is the Holy Spirit. It's like, you've been training for this for 10 years. You should probably say something. And I had a side conversation with the Holy Spirit, and I don't recommend that either. I was like, that's not the plan. The plan is salad, Gilmore Girls, and I'm tired. And it didn't matter because he took over. And the guy leans over, he goes, "Hey, what's a Mercy Tiger?" I said, "Oh, that's, I was at a school this morning, and this is their sweatshirt." Done. Still arguing with the Holy Spirit. He said, "Oh, what were you doing at the school?" Well, sometimes I travel and speak about things. What were you talking about? I'm like, for the love. I was talking about abortion. He said, "Oh, what's your game?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You're like religious, right? Like, what's your spiel?" And I told him what I'm trained to say. I said, "I'm pro-life because from the moment of conception, you and I were living, distinct, whole human beings according to the science of embryology. And there is no morally relevant difference between the embryos we once were and the adults we are today that would have justified taking your life back then but not now. Differences like size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, we'll learn those in just a second, aren't good enough reasons to say you could have been killed then, but not now. And he sat down on the stool next to me, and he wanted to know more. And we talked for about 15 minutes, and I said something that kind of set him off. I don't know what I said, but he looked at me and he said, listen to yourself. Do you not hear how ignorant you are? I just asked him a question. Told you guys, engage with questions. It's your best line of defense. I said, Chris, what do you mean when you call me ignorant? Tell me. He said, you actually think you're right about all this? I said, well, Chris, do you think you're right? He said, yes. I said, well, then why is it that when you think you're right, you get to be right? When I think I'm right, I'm ignorant. And he looked at me for a second and he said, well, I mean, it sounds really arrogant when you say it like that. And I said, this is because it kind of was, Chris. He said, you're right. I'm sorry. And we kept on talking. We got into a deeper conversation. Chris had been hurt by the Catholic Church, had walked away from it. He had 2 grown daughters that he barely got to see, and all he wanted in the world was for them to live lives that were good. But his atheistic position gave him no grounding for good. And we got far enough into that conversation, finally said goodnight. I don't know where Chris is now, but I still think about him. If somebody calls you a name, it's not the end of the conversation. They have not addressed your argument. In fact, if they call you a name, ask them, what do you mean by fill in the blank? I think it's okay to say a naughty word if that's the case. What do you mean by this? Here are some examples you'll see in culture. If you're pro-life, then you're going to be lopped in with a whole lot of other things in today's culture. You must be racist, sexist, anti-gay. You must be a born-again bigot if you're pro-life. You're pro-life until the baby is any number of these things. You don't care about babies that are poor. You certainly don't care about their mothers. You don't care about black or brown babies. You certainly don't care about transgender babies. You Christians, so hateful. Number 3, no uterus, no opinion. We'll get there. But look at those first 2. All of those examples, one name after another, one assumption made about you after another. These people have never even met you. What an interesting thing. You could ask, excuse me, what do you mean by your poster? What do you mean by any of these things? And see what's said. But I want you guys to assume for just a second, for the sake of thinking about the syllogism, let's assume that I am all of those. I'm not. But let's just assume that I am the worst kind of person that you will meet, like worst. How does that make it okay for other people to intentionally kill innocent human beings? It doesn't. All they've done is call you a name. It's not the end of the conversation. Gentlemen, no uterus, no opinion. This is often framed as a women's issue, as we just pointed out with the video by Mitzi, my new friend. I have an aunt named Mitzi, and I've never met another Mitzi, so I got real excited to meet one. Christopher Kaiser, the ethicist, will tell you this is no more a women's issue than it is a person with brown eyes' issue. This is a human rights issue. And what I'm proposing to you is a pro-life argument. The men that I work with make this argument every bit the way that I do. The argument has no gender. People have genders. Gentlemen, if somebody tells you you're not allowed to talk because you're a man, I would gently, probably through the form of asking a question, pause the conversation and say something like this. It's an invitation to consider something you're about to tell them, but you know it, and instead of just blasting it at them, ask them. Ask them something like, have you considered, that's an invitation, have you thought about the fact that we were having a conversation about ideas, and all of a sudden you've told me that I'm not allowed to say something on the basis of my gender? Ma'am, if I did that to you, that would be straight up sexism. It would be a terrible thing for me to do, to shut you down and not consider your thoughts because you're a woman. Why is it okay for you to do it to me? Now, I can't promise the reaction. She might haul off and slap you. I don't know. But I can tell you this. She will be hesitant to ever say that again. And if that's the case, that's a victory. You've made her think. Do not shut down because somebody says this to you guys. We need you. And you're here, so I'm assuming you're not going to be the ones who shut down. I will tell you this, though. Nobody is telling the pro-choice men to be quiet. When they attack you, they've not addressed your syllogism, not one bit. Number 5, they confuse functioning as a human with being a human. This is different than the science. This is when somebody says, I know what the science says, but it's not a person. I get that science tells us it's human, but it's not a rights-bearing human yet. They're making a distinction between human beings and persons, or humans who are able to bear rights. In other words, we've come full circle with our story. Some human beings don't matter as much as others, because some human beings are merely human, and other human beings have reached this special status that we call personhood or rights-bearing humanity. This is a question of value. So we've waded out of science and into philosophy, and now we want to know, what is it that makes human beings valuable? Now, philosophically, there are only 2 different ways to answer this question, 2 different avenues we can take. You might be valuable based on your function. That's called instrumental value, or a performance view of human value. People will use different words, but you get kind of the same meaning. An instrument is something that you use for a purpose. It performs in a certain way. So that's a word that I like to go to in my head, but it has to do with traits and attributes and abilities, functions, that you have because of your humanity. And there are 1,000,001 answers of that variety. The other avenue philosophy gives is you might be intrinsically valuable. That is valuable just in light of the kind of thing you are. Remember that thing I told you to commit to memory? Humanity doesn't come in degrees. You're human, so you matter. That's it. That one's so simple, most people overlook it or throw it out. But it's the only one that makes sense. Stephen Schwartz, this philosopher, says, there is no morally relevant difference between the embryos we once were and the adults we are today that would have made it okay to have killed us back then, but not now. That's what I told Chris. Those differences, Stephen Schwartz said, the only ones you can point out between embryos and us fall into these 4 categories. If you can remember the acronym SLED, you can remember these. Here they are. Size, the unborn is tiny. Level of development, they're less developed than we are. Environment deals with where they're located. They're inside, we're outside. And degree of dependency, they're more dependent on their mothers for survival at that point in time than we are. All of those things are true. All of those things are instrumental, functional, performance answers, but none of them disqualify them from valuable humanity. Here's why. They prove too much. SLED is a tool that shows us that performance answers, functional answers, prove too much. If we say that size is the thing that grants you value as a human being, the unborn are tiny, they don't count, they're insignificant. If that's what gives us value, then we have a problem, because we could all play a game called Let's Stand Up. You see the problem? Size does come in degrees. And if we're going to say that size disqualifies these smaller humans, then we've got to be consistent because of that pesky consistent logic. We find that we've created a world that has a value spectrum, and on that spectrum, smaller humans matter less than larger ones. Guys, I'm out. I'm a gymnast. I barely could stand behind the podium thing earlier. We had to use a music stand because I was short. Kids, they're done. The NBA would rule the world. You guys follow that logic? Level of development, same problem. The unborn are less developed than we are. Well, since when does your level of development determine your worth as a human being? If we're going to grant it here, we've got to grant it across the board. And we find that babies lose. Toddlers, nope. 16-year-olds, God help us. The 20-year-olds I work with don't even have fully developed brains yet, according to that same neurobiologist, Maureen Kondik. They won't get them until around the respectively 24 to 26 years of age. And it's earlier for girls. Don't know why, but know that it is. Level of development creates a value spectrum. And there's a lot of fancy ways people will use level of development. They'll talk about self-awareness. Peter Singer talks about sentience, consciousness. It's not conscious yet. That's a level of development. That's something that as an embryo you had every bit as a basic root capacity to develop in time. But consciousness even comes in degrees. If we're going to say consciousness is the thing that grants us value, you have 3 things to ask. Number 1, why is it consciousness and not something else? That's the grounding question. Number 2, how much consciousness is necessary before we have, poof, a valuable person? Number 3, who gets to decide that? You? What do we do with people who are lacking in consciousness at any given moment? After all, it is something that comes in degrees. What about those in a coma? Those who are under anesthesia? With sentience, what do we do with Alzheimer's patients in the late stages of the disease? Can we kill them too? The point is, when you hear a function, your job is to grab hold of it and demonstrate the problem. It doesn't just disqualify the unborn from valuable humanity. It disqualifies whole other classes of humans because functions, performance things, instrumental things come in degrees. If we're going to place our value on any one of these things, we have created an unjust society. There is no such thing as human equality when these are the value-giving things. There can't be. And the people that you're talking to care about equality. Environment is where you're located. The unborn are inside, we're outside. That's a difference of less than 10 inches, geographically speaking. If that's what brings you into valuable humanity, depending on who's holding the microphone, we can reverse that logic really easily. Be careful if you move to the next seat, if that's the case. And degree of dependency, the unborn are dependent on their mothers for survival. Yeah, my mom is type 1 diabetic. She's dependent on her medicine to help her body do what it cannot do on its own. And without it, she won't survive very long. I can't kill my mother because of her degree of dependency. But if we're going to grant it for these human beings, we have to be consistent. This is where most of the arguing takes place these days in the philosophy realm, but it just comes back to keeping the main thing the main thing. We're either valuable because of a trait or attribute that comes in degrees, and thus lots of humans lose out, or we're valuable based on being human. Turns out that's the scriptural view. It also turns out that's what Punchinello learned when he met Lucia. She didn't have any stickers. And every time somebody would try to put a sticker on her, it would fall off. They'd try to put a gold star on her when she did something great. It fell off. They'd try to put a gray dot on her because she was different and they didn't like her. It fell off. Punchinello had to know, how are you doing this? Why don't any stickers stick to you? She said, it's easy. I talk to Eli every day. Eli was the woodworker at the top of the hill. And he said, when Punchinello came up that big hill and opened the door, he said, hello, Punchinello. Definitely Morgan Freeman's voice that said that. Take it or leave it. Punchinello said, I want to know why Lucia doesn't have any stickers. And Eli said, she doesn't have any stickers because she's decided that what I think is more important than what they think. The stickers only stick if they matter to you, Punchinello. And the more you trust me, the less the stickers matter. Best part of that little story is that Punchinello didn't fully get it. It's a story about grace. It's a gospel story. And when he got up to walk out of Eli's workshop, he said to himself, I think he really meant it. And one of his dots fell off. That story is for you guys. The more that we understand who we are and why we matter, it's not based on performance, it's based on endowment. It's page 1 of the Bible, the Imago Dei, though we didn't go there to demonstrate it, but that's where it's grounded. And that means that your worth is something that was endowed to you by your Maker. No one can take it from you, and you can't give it away. It simply is. The more we recognize that and walk in it, the more we will be able to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Now, I've taken a lot of time this evening, and I want to have time for questions, but I have one more to cover, if you will allow me to, that might encompass some of the questions. So if you'll be okay with that, I'll keep going for a moment. Number 6, this is a biggie right now. They hide behind the hard cases. I want you can note that and then leave it there for a second. Because everywhere I go to talk about this issue, I'm asked about one of two things, usually both. Number one is what happens when a woman is raped and she becomes pregnant. How do we reason through that? How do we think through that from a pro-life perspective? It's so hard. Number 2, what happens when the pregnancy is threatening the mother's life? How do doctors navigate that? How should we navigate that? Both at a thought level, at a policy level, what do we do? These are fair questions. And I'm always going to assume that they're honestly being asked. So does somebody ask me that question? I want to give them a reasoned response. And I'm going to follow that kite up and talk about the ideas as best I can, but I'm holding on to that tether. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to move quickly in the interest of time. I'm asking for grace as I do. If we're talking about the issue of rape, that word is hard to say. God help me. Clearly, we are talking about something that is psychologically different than these other things. Still heavy and important, but somehow heavier for many people. And so when we do that, we have to recognize that when someone's asking this question, most likely they're asking from here, the heart, and not from here. But we have to go here to solidify ourselves so that we might meet them here. Even though it's psychologically different, I can still think of my 2-year-old. If I had a 2-year-old standing next to me who was conceived when his mother was raped, like my friend Ryan, and let's just say every day, for the sake of argument, he reminds her of the event, can she kill him? In a civil society, how should we treat other people who remind us of terrible things? May we take their lives so that we might feel better. Would it help us feel better? It becomes very clear when we understand that even in the case of rape, we're assuming on some level that the unborn are not human, because we would never argue that we take the life of a 2-year-old for that reason. That makes it abundantly clear. Now, I will say that in cases of rape, because of the evil done to that woman, there are things taken from her. And by the way, women are not the only ones who are raped in our world. They're just the ones who can become pregnant from it, so they're relevant for this conversation. It is evil. And it's not fair. And when that is done to her, things are stolen from her. Her innocence is taken. Her sense of security is shaken to the core. And among the things taken from her, a normal option is also taken. She's left with 2 possibilities if she becomes pregnant from it. It is rare, but it does happen. One of those possibilities is the intentional killing of an innocent human being. That is impermissible. So in reality, she's left with one. She's being asked to be a hero when she wasn't looking to be one and wasn't asking to be one, and it's not fair. That's the broken world we live in. That's the reality before her. But men and women, when she chooses life for that child, she commits the ultimate act of defiance and flies in the face of what was done to her. I will say there's an assumption that is prevalent because the objection comes from here, and that assumption is that if a woman is raped and conceives, if she's just allowed to have the abortion, that will undo what was done to her. That's a lie. Point it out gently, point it out graciously, but point it out. Rape is not an exception. When the mother's life is in danger, what do we do then? Well, my friend Courtney that I told you about that came to my house, this happened to her. She had an ectopic pregnancy after Levi was born. We don't know if it was a little boy or a little girl. Her embryo implanted in her fallopian tube and not in her womb where it could have developed normally. And so Courtney was going through a pretty tough time because she knew, according to her doctors, that if she continued with the pregnancy, that embryo was going to run out of room. It would not survive the pregnancy. And if allowed to continue growing there, her fallopian tube would rupture and she would bleed out internally in a matter of minutes That's an early in the pregnancy case of something that happens, and of the things that happen, that one is more common, though it is still rare. In Courtney's case, her doctors were looking at losing 2 lives. They had to act in order to save who they could save. Now, in Courtney's particular case, her baby died of a miscarriage. In other cases of ectopic pregnancy, that doctor will perform a procedure most often where they will remove that embryo from the mother. Here's the difference. Abortion is the intentional killing of a human embryo or fetus. When that doctor performs that procedure, they can foresee that the embryo will die by being removed, but the death of the embryo is not the doctor's intent. The doctor is saving 1 life rather than losing 2 lives. And in our broken world, those difficult decisions have to be made at times. I do not envy my sister-in-law who is a surgeon. You could talk about the same with medics on a battlefield. 2 soldiers who are mortally wounded, they can work on one. Maybe they can save him, but while they work on soldier A, soldier B passes away. The choice of soldier A, does that take anything from the humanity of the other man? No. Does it take anything from his intrinsic value as a human being? No. That medic is saving who he can save. EMTs at a trauma scene, same kind of thing. These cases where the mother's life is in danger, even if it were later in the pregnancy, the doctor acts to save who the doctor can. And because of the technology we have, it is almost unheard of that past the point of viability, which is marked right at around 22 to 23 weeks right now, it continues to slide backwards given the better the technology is, that a woman would lose her child later in the pregnancy because of something that's happened. I would not call that an abortion because of the way abortion is defined. It is not the intentional killing of an embryo or fetus. It is a doctor acting in a terrible situation to save who the doctor can save. And I'll tell you right now that what you will hear is lie after lie about women who are going to be forced into death sentences when their miscarriages go awry, or women who are going to be harmed if they can't seek a late-term procedure, if something's happening with their child that threatens their life, and how dare you hate women this way, and how dare we put women in danger this way. A simple Google search will show you there is not a single state law in our union that would refuse a woman a life-saving procedure if she needed one. And those don't even qualify as what we're talking about. So help me dispel those lies. The argument stands. Sometimes, if they've asked honestly, you answer the question and you go on from there. But there are other times when you're asked the question and you answer honestly, and then they keep coming at you. And they keep coming at you. And it's an attack. And it's louder, and you know they're trying to embarrass you, and it becomes very obvious they do not care what your answer is to those hard cases. They want to embarrass you. If that's the case, the conversation changes from you more to the people standing around. And here's what you do. If that becomes clear, and only when that becomes clear, you shift tactics, and you say, for the sake of the conversation, this is not my view, but let's just say I grant you the fewer than 1% of abortions that occur because of what you're describing. I'll give you those. Will you join me in defending the other 99%? What will that person most likely say? No. Abortion on demand. A woman has a right to an abortion for any reason, any time she wants, and you have no right to stand in her way. If that's the case, your response should be firm, and it should go something like this. Then please, for the sake of being honest, defend that view. Defend abortion on demand, and stop hiding behind victims of rape or those who've lost their children because of life-saving procedures needing to be performed. It is not fair to them, and you are being dishonest. Defend your true view. That's actually a higher view of the person you're talking to than the one they hold of themselves. You're calling them to honesty. An example, what used to be Twitter. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wrote this tweet a while back. First off is the name-calling. Christian extremists are passing forced birth laws to intimidate and cut off abortion services, including for victims of rape, incest, and child abuse. This is not her true view. We know that from her other public platforms where she's spoken. And so I think if this were in a conversation, I would challenge her to defend what her view is and not hide behind difficult circumstances. Finally, there's a woman by the name of Catherine Glenn Foster. She was the president for Americans United for Life. She is an attorney now. She is a public speaker, doing very much like what I do in the realm of advocating for the pro-life view and for children. She was in a hearing when this happened to her. She was challenged, and she had about 1 second to form a response, and she couldn't have done any better. Let's watch and see what happens.
And openly calling for a nationwide ban on all abortions with no exceptions for rape or incest. And if I've got that wrong, I would invite Ms. Foster to correct me. Do I have it wrong, yes or no?
If we added rape and incest exceptions, would you vote for it?
Okay, good. I reclaim my time, of course. This call is candidly.
She was not being cruel. She was not being rude. She was not sidestepping. She asked the right question at the right time to expose what was really happening. If we added rape and incest exceptions, would you vote for it? And he did not answer. She did the right thing. Life is at stake. We live at a time more than ever before where people are wrestling with the question, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be valuable? The pro-life view tells them a better story about themselves. Each one of us scientifically came into being at the moment of conception and was a full-fledged member of the human community. That intrinsic value that grounds our right to life and the right to life of our unborn neighbors grounds the worth and value of every single image bearer that we meet, including the ones advocating otherwise. It is the most inclusive view there is, and it's the only one where equality can truly be found. So remember to look for it when people are confusing moral claims with preference claims. Don't let them. Take the moment to explain what kind of claim it is. We'll be talking about that more in the morning, or in the afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, I'm sorry. Number 2, don't let them assume that the unborn are not human. Remember your toddler so that you know when that's happening, and then you can demonstrate that scientific response. Actually, did you know what science says? We are living distinct and whole human beings from the moment of conception. Number 3, do not let them assert instead of argue. Bumper stickers are not arguments. I don't care if Oprah said it. Number 4, do not let them attack you instead of argue. Ask them about the name they've called you or the way they've attacked your character. Number 5, do not let them confuse functioning as a human with being human. Your view is better. It includes all human beings. It does not exclude not only the unborn, but others. And finally, don't let them hide behind the hard cases. Give an honest answer, but if that honest answer isn't received, expose what's really happening. That's how we navigate this. All of these resources are available to you either through the book, The Case for Life, written by my boss, Scott Klusendorf. I'll show you a copy if you want to see it. I have one with me. My website for the organization I work for is called Apologetics, Inc. There are videos there right now where you can go find condensed versions of these. We're specifically focused on trying to change legislation in Florida, but the videos are pertinent to the conversation that we've just had. Scott's website is Life Training Institute at prolifetraining.com. Easy to remember. Apologetics.org, prolifetraining.com. And of course, your leaders here know how to reach me if you have questions after this. But I'm going to stop talking and let you guys do some talking if there are follow-up questions after all of that. Yeah, Mike. I'll repeat it. You go ahead.
Okay. I recall seeing those Florida videos, and Florida apparently has similar legislation on the ballot like Michigan had with Proposition 3.
Good.
No, it's on. But I also saw as one of those, I think Scott Klusendorf did, where he was talking about what the church was, or in that case, was not doing. Is that an issue that you see, where churches don't step up to the plate on this issue?
I think that's an issue that we generally see, but that certainly would not include all churches. A church that would invite somebody like me to come in is a church that takes this seriously. A church that is talking about this from the pulpit is a church that takes it seriously and that understands this is not just a cultural thing. This is not something that is separate from evangelism or the gospel, but yet this is something at the very heart of attacking the Imago Dei. So those churches that are doing it from here, doing it in the classroom, it's part of the conversation in the community, are the ones who are leading charges. Unfortunately, the majority doesn't look like that. And so we are forever talking to pastors about this type of stuff, and there are many pastors who are, to be fair to them, I'm married to a pastor. Tripp was a pastor for 10 years. Their jobs are not easy. They have a flock that they're trying to lead and lead well, and I think often the fear is causing more pain to those who have walked through abortion, women and men. Because there are many in our congregations who have. The numbers tell us that has to be the case. I'm never in a room where there's someone who hasn't been touched by this, as you pointed out. I think the response to that would be that because we know that abortion causes pain across the board, the pain is already there. By not mentioning it, we're not sparing people pain. We're sparing them healing that can come through the gospel's answer to the abortion issue. And by not talking about it, we are also implicitly telling congregations that Christianity has nothing relevant to say about this cultural issue. So I think that when pastors can wrap their heads around that idea, sometimes it takes some of this, although this isn't always what would come from the pulpit. There is a biblical foundation and a base that can be made, both through the Imago Dei, which is repeated from Genesis all the way to James, talking about being made in God's image. It's directly tied to the shedding of innocent blood. Like all of this, there's a biblical case that can be made. Everything I talk about is grounded there. And those pastors who grab hold of that and go, wow, this is a powerful thing and we can do that are doing great work. So to answer your question, unfortunately, yes, that is something we do see, but some churches are getting it really right. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was watching a podcast, and the people on the podcast suggested watching a documentary called Mafa 21.
Mafa 21, a documentary, okay.
Yeah, and it actually is just a sliver of what you have presented, but it was actually the beginnings of Planned Parenthood, how that started. And it was really, and they're, eugenics.
Yeah.
And how that all started, and like how black people were targeted specifically by those people, not only to be aborted, but to be sterilized too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found it on the internet or on my smart TV, Mafa 21.
Mafa 21, so a documentary, interesting.
M-A-A-F-A. It's a Swahili word.
M-A-A-F-A, okay, good. I think I talked over you, I didn't mean to.
Okay. And also too, the SLED thing. In the past, there was, it's a broadening of utilitarianism.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes, it's directly tied to that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Utilitarianism, the ethical view that we should do the things that will provide the most good for the most people.
And if you can't do that, yeah, you're going.
Yeah, and depending on how we qualify people.
Correct.
Right, yeah, good. Thank you for sharing about the documentary. I will say that that's important to note and understand, and in many conversations, that's a surprising factor for people. They don't realize the origins of Planned Parenthood. I will say, remembering in conversations, if it can go there, if that is helpful to move the conversation forward, by all means, but Planned Parenthood's beginnings isn't the reason abortion is wrong. So that's clear. That's another thing just to remember, but that's wonderful to know that we can go and learn more. Thank you. Look at your fun shoes.
You should have seen me earlier. So the Planned Parenthood connects because I was looking at a scroll, or I was scrolling, and there's this whole argument going back and forth, and someone said, I was at Planned Parenthood because I had a breast exam.
Yeah.
Or something related to that, and that's not all Planned Parenthood does.
Right.
So as I'm listening, I'm trying to think, okay, how do you form that argument? What's the response?
Yeah. I think the assumption there is that Planned Parenthood is the only provider of health care for women. In some, like that women won't have anywhere to go to get their breast exam or to get pregnancy tests or to have prenatal care offered to them, or sexual transmitted disease, which they're not called, infections, right, STIs anymore, to have those diagnosed or discovered. And that's simply false. First of all, the majority of Planned Parenthood's money, as we know, does go toward providing abortions. And so I don't know that the good that they do somehow makes up for the rest. That's not how good and evil work. It's not a scale like that. And so for that reason, I think Planned Parenthood should not be there. But there are other healthcare facilities where women can go to receive all of those things, including, and I know that Gaylord has a wonderful one, a pregnancy resource center. Those exist in almost every community, major, if not in a community, then one right nearby. They're not hard to reach, and they outnumber abortion providers. Gosh, before the overturn of Roe, it was at least 3-1, if not more than that. So most people don't even know that there are these places. They're largely volunteer run. They do, many more and more each day are becoming medically accredited with medical staff who can provide not only ultrasounds, but who can do prenatal care, who can connect with hospitals, all of it. And to counter the narrative that I know you know these things, but that we can only care about the babies until they're born, that is not the case with the pregnancy resource centers. I'm going to one in Hillsdale on Tuesday night. They're providing post-abortive care for men and women. They do discipleship one-on-one with men and women. They meet with families. They have a store where they do parenting classes, and moms and dads can earn the ability to have all of these supplies well into that child's early years. Not only that, but they're forming connections within the community with local businesses and skill training and just how to parent. So all of this is happening, and most people have no idea.
Well, I think in that same argument stream, there was something about how difficult it is for adoptions. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes along with what you're saying. Okay, first we have to deal with the abortion itself is the issue.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Not what they do if they have the baby. That's,
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about laws about.
Sure. We're talking just simply, we're trying to say we might not have every answer, but we can certainly say that as human beings who are talking about occupying Mars, we can find a better solution as to how to solve these issues than killing our offspring. That's pretty much the brunt of it. And so I think if you offer that, really your view of what human beings is higher than the person who thinks we're just helpless. And so this is the only way out. And I would say, no, we are not people of simple optimism. We're like, oh, you can do it. No, that runs out. No, we are people of hope. So we walk into the hard things, and that's what we find with the pregnancy resource centers and the churches that are attached to them, is people who willingly sacrifice time, energy, convenience, their homes, their food, all of it, so that these young moms or young families can find a way. That's what it's going to take. It just costs something, but that's what love does. Mm-hmm. It's good.
Okay, on that, can you talk about this pro-life movement where people claim kind of what you were getting at, that you pro-lifers are inconsistent because you only care about the baby being born?
Well, that's what I was saying. Tripp said, can you talk about the narrative that says pro-lifers only care about the baby until it's born, and that's not the case.
That's all you talk about, is just stopping abortion. But what about all these other problems?
No, yeah, more and more women, societies, nonprofits, things that are being made. I work closely with Save the Storks out of Colorado Springs, which is an organization that does buses that goes out, like they build buses with ultrasound machines in them, so nurse and advocate go out into the communities who possibly can't get in or whatever. But they have other initiatives as well. They support other organizations up and coming, finding creative ways to, their term is love them both, right? Love mom and children. So it's just, there's too much to counter it that actually exists. It's just you're going to have to be the ones who tell people that story, because they're certainly not hearing about these places and things and initiatives from popular media. Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question here. And actually, just to add to your point there, Tripp, another thing that pregnancy centers are doing, including ours here extensively, is starting to minister to men and women who've gone through abortions.
Yes.
And do grief healing and that sort of thing, even through the church. So definitely not true that they only care about the baby being born and then drop people off. But I had a question back to the church side of things. So with different churches, different denominations, I think especially in Protestant churches, the churches will have their doctrines and disciplines and kind of social witness, and they usually have a statement on their beliefs regarding abortion, including our denomination. And I've looked at several of them, again, mostly Protestant churches. They're all very similar, and they say something like this. We believe in the sacredness of human life from beginning to end. God determines the beginning and end of a life. We believe human life begins at conception, and therefore we resist abortion. So all good, all solid. Then they always add, except in cases of life on life where the well-being of a mother and the unborn are at stake, including our own denomination states that. And I think given your discussion on the hard cases and ectopic pregnancies, I think you've really laid out well that is not really an abortion situation. So I think that extra language is really unnecessary.
Yep.
I think it offers wiggle room and just kind of makes us more ambiguous than taking a solid stance on it.
Yeah.
So my question is, and I would like our own denomination to change our language. That's one of the reasons I'm asking this question, and to remove that second part of it. My question is, could you talk through one more time just to make us solid and equipped on an ectopic pregnancy?
Yep.
And what, scientifically, what happens there if you say, well, that's a baby, I'm not going to do anything?
Right.
Is it essentially completely impossible that the baby's ever going to live? And therefore, if you do nothing, you're simply just leaving the mother at risk for a life-threatening emergency. Mm-hmm. Could you talk us through that so we could help explain
I can
that?
do the best I can. I know of maybe 2 cases on record where a baby survived an ectopic pregnancy. One that I can remember better is where the baby implanted on the mother's liver, not even in the fallopian tube, and it was just a strange medical anomaly. We don't have the medical capacity or ability yet to transplant that embryo to the womb where it could develop safely, which is why if left developing there, if nothing is done, that tube will rupture. And so will that happen every single time? There may be anomalies, but given what we understand as to the way the world works, that is not likely not going to be the case. Now, there are mothers who probably have waited and tried and seen, and can something be done? But again, back to the language and the way we define our terms. Abortion is the intentional killing of the human embryo or fetus. I'm leaning on the church fathers here, because in a broken world, we lean on the, first of all, morality, but ethics, the way we carry that out in the world. And we have these cases where what I appealed to is actually the law or the principle of double effect. Though the outcome is foreseen, it is not intended by the one performing it. That would apply in situations of just war and other things as well. Now, this brings about interesting questions in the field of bioethics, which if we think about pro-life voices, we need them in that field as well. Please, go into the sciences, go into all of it. Kids, grandkids, encourage them in those directions. We are now talking about the advent of artificial wombs, which brings a whole host of questions with it, like any new technology does. Technology is a tool. Our use of it determines good or bad. Could that be a moral use of an artificial womb? Yeah, maybe. That would have been really great if Courtney's baby could have been transplanted to survive. Now, again, with bioethics, raises more questions than anything else. We simply don't know long-term effects. We don't know the intricacy of life within the womb beyond a certain point, and the relationship with the mother that forms, the hormonal exchanges that take place, all of it woven together in your mother's womb was not, just poetic language. I think it aptly describes what happened. So, to your question, you could probably find a couple of cases where the baby survived, strange medical anomalies. More likely what you'll find is these are the possible procedures that are available to save one life rather than losing 2 lives.
Right.
Misdiagnosis, of course, of other issues. Misdiagnoses of other life-threatening issues.
Oh, the misdiagnoses, what are you getting? Where does that connect? I just lost you, sorry.
So, like as a pastor, I would be recommending, okay, well, let's follow this through. As soon as the doctor tells you, oh, the baby's implanted in the fallopian tubes, don't just run with it. Rather, let's get some second opinions. How long is it safe to wait? Is there a possibility that the embryo is going to change positions? Like, what kind of craziness is the Lord going to do in all of this?
Good.
And so at what point do we have to make that decision is appropriate? Just like with any other medical sort of procedure, just to run with whatever a secular doctor tells you in a moment is probably not the first best thing you should do.
Good.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
So I
helpful.
hope live stream could hear that. Tripp was just talking about if there was a diagnosis for something like an ectopic pregnancy, instead of just running with it, to possibly go seek another medical advice or other things like that, because there's a little window of time, but it's dangerous. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'm happy to hang out and do this. I want to be respectful to your time. It is 8:35, so if anybody had sitters at home or anything like that, but otherwise, I'm fine where we are.
We really appreciate this.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Well, it can be a lonely road, right?
Tripp, do you win many arguments at home? We never argue.
What are you talking about? We don't argue.
Or if I ever start to argue, I just remember, oh wait, she's right. So
That's not true.
No. It's
very
what
wise.
do you mean by that?
Right.
That's right. What do you
He's
mean?
great
Keep
with
the
his-
conversation going.
His questions.
So thank you again,
Thank you.
Meg, for coming, and Tripp, the bodyguard, the husband, and there was something else in his email. Sign off. Cheerleader. Tripp and Meg are going to be here for the rest of the weekend, so if you're watching live stream or you're here present, tomorrow afternoon they'll be talking again about as a marriage, sex, and love, and how those have been redefined by the culture, how we can better understand that. And then tomorrow night, the barriers against
Coming to Christ. Or walking out your Christian convictions.
Yeah, barriers to walking out your Christianity. And then Sunday morning, we have 2 services at 9 and at 10:45 that you can come and be a part of. So we invite you to come or come back. And let me just pray for them. And then they're going to remain here for a few minutes off live stream if you have some other questions or thoughts you want to share. Lord, we're just grateful for the ministry that Meg and Tripp have, and ask that you would just continue to uplift them as they continue to do the work that will help people understand, especially those of us who believe in life, that it comes from you. God, that you can use us to help plant seeds of doubt in the lives of those who have just ignored the sanctity of life, ignored the science of embryology. Lord, we ask that you would continue to work in us, that we might be fully yours in this arena and in all arenas of our life. In Jesus' name. And all God's people said,